Welcome back for another deep dive. Today we'll be exploring some verses from the Quran,
Okay.
and we'll be focusing on themes of like belief and behavior and consequences.
Okay. Sounds good.
So, I'm really excited about this one
Yeah.
because I think there's a lot to unpack here, and
Mm-hmm.
we're not going to be able to cover everything, obviously,
Of
but
course. Yeah.
hopefully this deep dive will be a good starting point for people to kind of
Timing off point.
jumping off point for further exploration.
Yeah, for sure.
So, right off the bat, when I was looking at these verses, I was really struck by
Huh.
this concept of divine decree.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this one verse that mentions Allah setting a seal on the hearts and hearing of disbelievers
Right.
and a veil over their vision. And it's such powerful imagery. And
Yeah.
I don't know, it really got me thinking,
All
like,
right.
is this just about rejecting a specific faith? Or could this be talking about
Okay.
like a
It's a
broader...
great question.
Yeah.
And the seal and the veil that you're talking about, it's not meant to be taken literally.
Right.
It's really talking about a spiritual state
Mhm.
where understanding and guidance are blocked.
Okay.
So the Quran is suggesting that, those who reject faith
Mm-hmm.
might be closing themselves off to certain truths,
Interesting.
even when they're presented with evidence.
It makes me think about like those times when you just can't wrap your head around a new idea,
Oh, yeah.
no matter how hard you try.
Totally.
Like it's almost like our own biases or preconceptions are like
Yeah.
holding us back.
Absolutely.
Could that be a kind of seal preventing true understanding?
It could be. Yeah. The
Yeah.
Quran really invites us to reflect on our own limitations
Mm-hmm.
and consider how our preconceived notions might be like shaping our perception of reality.
It's a humbling thought.
Yeah.
And then there's this other verse that kind of builds on this idea. It
Yep.
says that those who are deaf, dumb, and blind will not return. And this seems to suggest like there's this point of no return where
Yeah.
if you keep rejecting the truth, you might reach a point where you can't find your way back.
So returning in this context,
Okay.
it refers to returning to the right path,
Got it.
a state of belief and submission to Allah.
Okay.
And this verse is implying that by continuously turning away from the truth and from guidance,
Mm-hmm.
an individual might get to a point where they just can't find their way back.
So there are consequences to our choices,
Yeah.
even on a spiritual level.
Definitely.
But then the Quran also emphasizes like the incredible power and mercy of Allah.
Right.
And there's this really vivid description
Yep.
of a rainstorm with
Yeah.
darkness and thunder and lightning.
Mm-hmm.
And it says that disbelievers, they react to it with fear,
Yeah.
covering their ears to block out the thunder.
Yeah.
Or-
That imagery is so powerful and so deliberate.
Yeah.
The storm is like a metaphor for Allah's power
Okay.
and the awe that it inspires, particularly for those who haven't acknowledged his authority yet.
So it's like this reminder of the forces that we can't control.
For sure.
But then the Quran balances that with all these examples of Allah's compassion and forgiveness,
Right.
like the story of Musa or Moses and the children of Israel.
Yeah.
They were always,
Being tested.
yeah, constantly being tested and making mistakes.
Hmm.
But Allah continued to forgive and provide for them.
And what's really interesting is that
Yeah.
phrase that keeps coming up, so that you may be grateful.
Right.
This suggests that Allah's mercy, it's not just about forgiveness.
Okay.
It's about giving people another chance to see and appreciate his blessings
Mm-hmm.
and prompting them to turn back to him in gratitude.
So it's like these acts of mercy are meant to guide people back to the right path.
Yeah, in a way.
And this brings up this other thing that I found really interesting,
Okay.
guidance and free will. So, we see all these verses emphasizing the importance of following divine guidance. But then we have the story of Adam and Eve,
Right.
who were warned not to approach a certain tree or else
Mhm.
they become wrongdoers.
It raises the question of free will in Islam.
Right.
So Allah provides guidance and he sets boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
but humans still have the choice to obey or disobey.
Yeah.
And the story of Adam and Eve
Mm-hmm.
is often interpreted as a reminder that even though we have that guidance, we're still responsible for what we do
Mm-hmm.
and we'll face the consequences.
Which reminds me of this verse that really resonated with me.
Okay.
It says, "Those who follow Allah's guidance will have no fear and will not grieve."
Right?
So could this suggest that, like, if we align ourselves with a higher purpose,
Mm-hmm.
we can find this sense of peace and security?
Yeah, it's a profound idea.
Mm-hmm.
The verse speaks to the human longing for meaning and purpose.
Right.
It suggests that following divine guidance can lead to inner peace and tranquility,
Wow.
even when things are tough.
So it makes you wonder, like, what guidance do we follow in our own lives?
Yeah.
And how does that impact our decisions and, like, our emotional well-being?
It's something worth thinking about.
Yeah,
These
definitely.
verses, they remind us that
Mhm.
the wisdom of the Quran, it's not just for the past.
Right.
It's timeless insights that we can apply to our lives today.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
So,
And, as we dig deeper into these ideas of choice and consequence,
hmm
it's worth looking at what the Quran says happens to those who choose disbelief.
okay.
There were several verses that talk about what happens when you reject faith,
Right.
including punishment in the hereafter.
There's one verse that really stood out to me.
Okay.
It warns against attributing equals to Allah while knowing that there's nothing similar to him.
Right.
It seems like it's saying God is totally unique.
You've hit on a core principle in Islam.
Okay.
It's called Tawheed, the
Right.
belief in the oneness of God,
Okay.
and associating partners or equals with Allah. That's called shirk,
Shirk.
and it's a major sin in Islam.
So to really believe, you have to understand that nothing compares to Allah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Tawheed is essential.
But even though the Quran warns about what happens if you don't believe,
Mm-hmm.
it also talks about the rewards for people who do have faith and live good lives.
That's right.
Like there's this one verse that describes the reward from Allah,
Yes.
and it says, it would be better if people only knew.
It's like the Quran is inviting you
Yeah.
to discover how beautiful and fulfilling faith can be.
It doesn't force you to believe. It
Right.
just tells you how great it is.
And it's interesting how the Quran doesn't just focus on individual belief.
Mm-hmm.
It also talks about how important actions are,
Okay.
especially towards your family and those in need.
Right.
There's a verse that tells believers to be good to their parents,
Mm-hmm.
their relatives, orphans, the needy,
Mm-hmm.
and to always speak kindly.
It paints a picture of a society that's caring and just where everyone contributes to the well-being of others.
That's the idea.
So the Quran is connecting being a good person
Yes.
with being responsible for your community.
Where does zakah fit into all of this?
Zakah.
Charity.
Oh, yeah, that's a great example.
Right.
Mhm.
It's not just something you should do.
Right.
It's an obligation
Okay.
if you can afford it.
So by giving to others,
Mm-hmm.
you're actually purifying your wealth.
And helping to create a more equal society.
So it's not just about individual acts of giving.
Yeah.
It's about building a system where wealth is shared more fairly
Exactly.
and the needs of the less fortunate are met.
Zakah shows how spiritual practice and social justice are linked.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes us think about our own values and what we do.
Yeah.
Do these principles resonate with you? How can you
Mhm.
be kind and generous in your own life?
It's a challenge for all of us.
It
So we've talked about a lot.
without
Divine decree,
Mhm.
the power and mercy of Allah,
Mhm.
guidance versus free will. Yeah.
the consequences of believing and not believing,
Right.
and the importance of good deeds and social responsibility.
It's a lot to take in.
But I'm curious about how the Quran deals with different religions,
Okay.
especially since it came from a place with a lot of different faith communities.
That's important to explore.
Mm.
The Quran acknowledges other religions, but also sets itself apart.
Okay.
There's a verse that says
Mm-hmm.
that those who trade faith for disbelief have strayed from the sound path.
So it sounds like Islam recognizes that there were revelations before,
Yes.
but it also stresses that Prophet Muhammad's message is the final guidance.
Exactly.
Okay.
The Quran sees a connection between the Abrahamic faiths,
Mm-hmm.
but it also has its own unique message.
And there's this other verse
Yeah.
where Jews and Christians both say the other group isn't right,
Oh, yeah.
even though they're both reading from the same book.
It's a powerful image,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, it's still relevant today,
It really is.
even when people share the same scriptures.
They can disagree and interpret things differently.
So even though the Quran makes a distinction,
Mm-hmm.
it also encourages respect between different faiths.
It does.
But what about people who are questioning their beliefs
Mm-hmm.
or even changing them?
Okay.
What does the Quran say about that?
It actually addresses that directly.
Okay.
There's a verse that talks about people who are having these doubts,
Mm-hmm.
and it says, what has turned them from their direction of prayer? It's like the Quran knows that people will question things
Right.
and that faith can be a journey.
Yeah.
And the answer to those questions is really simple but deep.
Okay.
It says, for Allah is the East and the West.
Wow.
So true faith, it's not about physical direction or rituals.
Mm-hmm.
It's about connecting your heart and intentions with something bigger.
That's actually pretty comforting. It
Mm.
means there's room to grow and learn.
Absolutely.
Faith isn't about blindly following.
Nope.
It's about having a real connection with the divine.
It's a journey, not a destination.
I like that.
The Quran encourages us to keep learning and thinking because Allah's knowledge is infinite and includes everything.
But the Quran also reminds us what can happen if we reject faith.
Right.
There's this verse that compares those who don't believe
Okay.
to someone yelling at something that can't hear. They only see calls and cries, but no real communication.
It's a strong image, isn't it?
Yeah.
The Quran is saying that rejecting faith could be like shutting yourself off from understanding anything.
It reminds me of when we get so stuck in our own heads that we
Right.
don't listen to others
Totally.
or consider different points of view.
We've all been there.
For sure.
And speaking of reminders,
Yeah.
there's another verse that talks about living a life with purpose.
Okay.
It describes someone who wishes they could live for 1,000 years, but then they realize that even that wouldn't change the consequences of their actions.
That's pretty intense.
It highlights how short our lives really are and how important it is to make choices that align with our values.
So it's not just about how long we live. It's
No.
just about how we live.
Exactly. We need to be intentional and try to make a positive impact.
So as we finish up our deep dive into the Quran, I'm amazed by all the different things we've talked about.
Yeah.
Belief, behavior consequences, social justice,
It's a lot.
divine mercy, free will, different religions.
The Quran has so many ideas.
It really does, and they still resonate with people today.
What's really fascinating is that throughout the whole text,
Mm-hmm.
there's this constant message.
Okay.
Seek knowledge, reflect on what you do, and strive for a just and compassionate life.
That's a message that everyone can relate to.
It really is. And as you continue exploring the Quran on your own, remember to stay curious. Look for different interpretations.
Okay.
And think about how his teachings can challenge and inspire you.
To live a more meaningful life.
Exactly. That's what it's all about.